This is Everett, producer of The Scalpel. In this episode, we're proud to be joined by Joe Kent. Joe is running for Congress in the state of Washington, and at The Scalpel, we felt it was very important to introduce you to him if you don't already know who he is. Doesn't matter where you live in this country, we often wish we could find people to elect to represent us at the high levels of government, to protect the Constitution and our rights, and to protect the idea of the United States of America. And so often, I feel like we're left wondering, where are these people? Joe Kent is one of them, and we want you to meet him.
The Scalpel with Dr. Keith Rose. Cutting down to the truth through history and experience. Subscribe to The Scalpel wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow us on Instagram at The Scalpel Podcast, on Twitter at The Scalpel Edge. Email kfr@scalpeledge.com or the website scalpeledge.com. The next episode of The Scalpel starts now.
What are you waiting for?
Welcome to The Scalpel. This is Dr. Keith Rose. We have a very special guest today. We have a gentleman who, at 18 years old, enlisted in the Army, enlisted in the infantry, and worked his way into the Ranger Regiment. Now, a lot of people go to Ranger school, but not everyone gets in the regiment. After that, he entered this, probably went to Q school, went to Special Forces, and after 9/11, he volunteered to serve around the globe. Now he's volunteering for a much more dangerous assignment, and that's he wants to go to Congress. So welcome, Mr. Joe Kent. Hopefully we're going to be calling you Congressman pretty soon. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks so much for having me on.
You bet. Tell me a little bit about yourself and what drove you to this decision.
Well, yeah, I mean, I actually never planned on running for office or being a politician of any kind. So like you said in that introduction, spent the vast majority of my adult life serving the country in the military, in special operations abroad overseas, in our global war on terror. I actually had to cut my career a little shorter than I wanted anyways. I retired from active duty Army in 2018, and then went right into what was going to be my second career as a paramilitary operations officer in the CIA. Served there for about a year until tragically my late wife, Shannon Kent, who was also in the military and serving overseas in special operations, was killed fighting ISIS in Syria. She was killed about a month after Trump attempted to get our troops out of Syria the first time. I was a strong supporter of President Trump's America First foreign policy and his efforts to get us out of our endless wars. So my wife would have been out of Syria had Secretary of Defense Mattis and a bunch of other unelected bureaucrats not gone against the will of the American people, gone against the commander-in-chief, and committed bureaucratic slow roll. She and three other Americans that she was killed with would be alive to this day. So I realized I had to step aside and stop putting myself in physical danger because we have two young children. So I resigned from government, had an opportunity to meet President Trump at Dover when my wife's remains were returned to me. And I just wanted to tell him the way I viewed his foreign policy and the way I viewed what I saw at the mid to senior levels of the Department of Defense and the CIA, the way that there was just this culture working against President Trump. And I figured nothing would come of it. It was kind of my cash out moment, there's no ramifications. I'm resigning. But President Trump's an unconventional guy, and so he wanted to hear what I had to say, put me in touch with his administration in the national security realm. I became an unofficial advisor. At the same time, I moved my family back here to where I'm from, the Pacific Northwest, and this is 2019, 2020, so everyone knows what happens next. There's the COVID, the pandemic lockdowns, massive riots on the streets of Portland where I actually grew up, spilling over into the district that I chose to live in, which is right across from Portland because it's actually more of a traditional conservative district in the Pacific Northwest. And then culminating with the election that had widespread discrepancies and widespread amounts of fraud. It was certified, and then there was the riot on January 6th, and the woman that I voted for, a Republican, Jamie Herrera Butler, voted for the impeachment of Trump. So seeing the totality of what the left, what the tech oligarchs were doing to our country, and the way that this narrative was being driven that all Trump supporters and anybody who dissents from the current regime is a terrorist or an insurrectionist, I realized that we were on the cusp of losing our country. So the only thing that I could think to do was attempt to go and primary Jamie Hura Butler to go and try and take our country back. So that's how I got to this point.
Yeah, brother, I think we probably shoot a lot of the same dirt. And it seems like you have a lot of situational awareness to what's going on. I went in to help the administration in 2017. And after 2 weeks working inside the West Wing, I just told the people I was helping to leave that they were being subverted from the inside. And you're headed uphill. I agree with your assessment of Mad Dog. I don't think highly of him at all. And the whole military-industrial complex put guys like you and I, and unfortunately your wife, at a lot of risk. And I'm sure you probably have a lot of the same stories where you would produce information that could have produced results that was never acted on. And we're on a wartime setting now. And I'm not talking about kinetic. I'm talking about just for the heart and soul of this country. And we need a bunch of Churchills running, not Chamberlains. And when I was reading your backstory and hearing it in your voice, you're definitely more in the Churchill camp. And when you get to Congress, because I believe you're going to get there, it's going to take a lot of spine stiffening on the other congressmen. How are you going to approach that?
I really think the principal thing is just like I did in my military service. I started as an enlisted guy, eventually became a warrant officer, but I always tried to stay as connected as I possibly could with the ground level, especially my experiences overseas. You have some of the same ones, but you can't beat ground truth. But ground truth can easily be diluted by bureaucracy and then by personal desires and goals and agendas. And for me, because I never plan on going into Congress, I don't care about my political career. I want to win this seat. I do this instead of a wartime appointment, but I just want to lead by example and go there and be vocal. The American people don't want to go along to get along politicians anymore. They want to see us weigh on the issues, and they want to see us fight for them. When the American people give an elected leader a mandate, they want them to not go and get the best committee assignments, raise the most money. They want them to go and fight for them, and that's never been more relevant than right now.
My son is 17, and he wants to go to West Point. He's talking about just enlisting, going to the Rangers, and then taking the walk in a few years. And he came and he told me, he said, Dad, I need to know what's going on the ground. And it's just like you said, guys like you are true warriors in every sense of the word. What most people don't realize is they're not knuckle draggers, but they're well thought out. And the best guys I worked with were the NCOs. The best guys I worked with were the guys that started out enlisted, that worked their way up, because even in the military, unfortunately, you and I both run up against the bureaucracy, which really just means desk. I called it attack of the desk or the chairborne Rangers. The guys that are only out to check that next box, to get the correct par, to move on to the next, the correct evaluation, to move on to the next assignment. But I think, like you said, we're at a point in our nation's history where, it really encourages me to see guys like you stepping up, guys that I know have been there, done that, and you understand the fight that you're getting ready to get in is going to be unlike anything you've ever seen, because there's going to be a lot of people coming at you that they're not going to do it from the front. They're going to come behind. So I think building a coalition is going to be important. Have you talked to any other guys that are running?
I have, yeah. I've talked to quite a few guys. I just recently did a joint fundraiser down in Florida with Anthony Sabatini, who is running down there in the great state of Florida, strong America First candidate. He's doing great work in the Florida state legislature, suing all the counties that are putting on COVID restrictions. So a true America First warrior, a fellow Army veteran. So he's a guy I'm happy to have teamed up with. And there's a few others out there too. There's 7 Navy SEALs. And I know of at least one other Green Beret, Mike Collins, also down in Florida in the Tampa area, who's an amputee, who's just like me, saw what's going on and is stepping off the bench. So I really want to build some strong coalitions with these, with who will be my fellow freshmen.
I think that's important. I will tell you, my suspicion or my understanding of Congress, I've dealt with some, I've helped some guys, is that when you get there, you're going to get assigned, they'll encourage you to get a certain chief of staff. And I believe a lot of guys get there and they get managed. I'm not too worried about that with you. In fact, I get guys calling all the time that want to come on, and I know there's no use interviewing them because they're go along to get along, but tell me how you're going to approach that, how you're going to approach a chief of staff and being, quote, managed.
Yeah, I mean, personnel is policy, as they say, and I think with both of our experiences in the Trump administration, we saw that heavily. I mean, you can have an agenda all day long, but if you don't have the right people, then you're going to get managed, or you're just going to get pretty much outgamed. So, I want to have a really good combination of bringing in outsiders. You can't bring in all outsiders, otherwise you won't know where all the key levers of power are to flip. But I've got a couple friends. I was stationed at Fort Belvoir for the latter part of my career, then living in the Beltway area when I was at the agency. I know good patriots and good friends, especially fellow veterans that have kind of gone into that realm that I trust. I've already got a chief of staff more or less picked out who's very well versed in D.C., but I knew him when he and I chewed a bunch of the same dirt together in the military. So. But then bringing people from the district, too, is absolutely key because my district is geographically very big, geographically very diverse, and I want to have key power brokers from the district that know what's going on with our forest industry, with our fishing industry, with our tech sector, in every just walk of life to stay as connected as possible, which is basically what I kind of had to do as a warrant officer in Special Forces. I had to stay plugged in with all the different MOSs on my team, but then also be able to look up and out at a broader picture of the interagency and different partner forces, that type of spectrum. So I know it's going to be challenging. I think picking the right people is always one of your biggest challenges, but if you get that right, everything else will kind of fall into place. So I'm definitely putting a lot of effort into that.
I got to tell you, that's probably the best answer. I've asked that question to so many people. And your situational awareness of where you're headed is to be commended. And you're going with people that you know, that you're looking at. And I would encourage everyone out there to get in touch with your congressman, not just support Joe, but Joe, I would hope that you'll talk about, like you did, Anthony Sabatini and other guys that are running that are good, because we need to get behind you. Personnel is everything. When I was in trying to help the Trump administration, one of the first things I said to him was, who's the director of OPM? And they never got that fixed until just a few months before he left office. And that director of personnel management is so important. And I think you're going to have, you've already been through a lot in your life. We're a little more similar than you can imagine. I raised 4 boys pretty much alone till I got remarried. So there is hope out there, I can tell you. But you've had to deal with stressors at home. You've had to deal with the loss of your wife. But when you get to Congress, you're still going to have your kids. You're still going to have to allot your time. And I think your training, I know Green Berets, you're force multipliers. You guys have to go in and you use folks and work with people and bring out the best in them. And I think you can do that where you're going. But you also want to spend some time with your kids. How have you thought about balancing that out?
I have. Washington State is about, other than Alaska and Hawaii, we're about as far away from Washington, D.C. as it gets. So being a commuter to D.C. really isn't much of an option. So I plan on, my kids are really young. They're 4 and 6 right now. I plan on bringing them to D.C. with me. I'm going to feel it out that first year, do I, spend half my time in the airplane, flying back and forth? What works out the best right now in my head, as committed as you need to be to being the representative there in Washington, D.C. Like the woman I'm running against, she's missed like 800 roll call votes in the 10 years that she's been an elected official. And I'm just kind of like, well, what are we paying your salary for? So I know that my job is to be there and to represent the district in DC. So I think home base, at least temporarily, would be the DC area, have my kids there so that I can have a balanced life and be able to prioritize them, and then do quick trips back to the district. We get a longer break, come back to the district, and stay plugged in there. But family balance is absolutely key to me. My kids 100% come first. Really something I ask myself every day. And the only place I've been conflicted in this whole endeavor is really like, hey, am I putting myself in a situation where like the kids can't come first anymore? But the more I think about it, I just don't see that there's any other option but to go and fight at this level. Because if I don't, I'm going to have to tell them in 10 years or so, like, hey, man, America was a great place, guys. But I just didn't have time to really deal with it anymore. So that's going to be I think that's going to be one of my biggest challenges, honestly, because it was a big challenge in the military. But with the perspective of having to deploy for weeks or months on end and be away from them in my former life, I feel well equipped to deal with this.
And I apologize. I was pitching that one over the plate for you. I knew you would knock it out of the park. My children were that young age when I was deploying a lot, and it was tough. But I want to encourage you something, brother. My twins are 17 now, and even though I was gone during that time, they understood. And what you're doing right now is for your kids. It's not just being with them, but it's trying to create that future and pass down that generational freedom that we were given. And I think that's so critical during this time. So you're coming from God's country, literally. I've been to the Pacific Northwest. You live in one of the most beautiful places in the world that's being destroyed by a man-made disaster, whether it's Antifa or just the liberal creep that we're seeing. As you're in Washington, as you're in D.C., how are you guys going to address what's going on in your neck of the woods? Is there a movement? I'm just curious. There's no canned answer for this. Is there a movement there to kind of take back that region? Because that's one of my favorite parts of the country.
Yeah, it really is. And we obviously get a bad rap because of our urban hubs. So for folks who haven't been out here, it's like you said, it's God's country. It's absolutely beautiful. It's the heart of the West. The problem is we have very activist, I would say activist globalist governors, especially Jay Inslee, where we live, the state of Washington. For people who aren't familiar, he is essentially the Andrew Cuomo of the West. Everything that Cuomo did, Inslee probably did before, but just without as much fanfare. And the way that a lot of these activist mayors in Seattle and then in Portland, which is directly to our south by a couple miles, have just let their cities become a haven for Antifa, it's really dragging the rest of the district down. But if you drive in any cardinal direction out of Portland or Seattle for probably about 10 minutes, you are in very deep red, very, very patriotic America. People who've never been out here don't believe that. And in Texas or Oklahoma or just the heartland of America. And I think that's actually like a national divide between urban and rural. But my district is very one urban and the rest is the big issues that we have out here, I think really tie nicely in with the America agenda. We've had our timbers had a catastrophic effect on our economy. It's had a catastrophic effect on people's ability to get a decent paying job that will help them support their family. And then also on the environmental side, this is the altar of environmentalism and then global economics. But our forests have not been managed, and every summer we see these massive wildfires in the West. That's not due to global warming. That's due to forest mismanagement. And we're allowing our forests to burn as we sacrifice our economy. So part of bringing back the America First, bringing back manufacturing, bringing back the natural resources sector is reviving our timber industry. Same thing with our fishing industry along the Columbia and along the Pacific. So those economic issues, those national security issues, especially of what Antifa and BLM are doing. And because we have so many sanctuary cities out here, all the border issues that affect Texas and Arizona that we're seeing have a direct effect up in our district. I talk to our sheriffs all the time. We have a massive uptick in cartel violence because literally we are right in between with a highway, with multiple highways running through these failed sanctuary cities. So these national issues that people are seeing, they really affect us right here in the Pacific Northwest.
Oh, I know. People don't realize where you are, and people are flooding across the borders down here in Texas. And a lot of them are moving up there, or they're being flown up there. They go anywhere they have sanctuary, anywhere that law enforcement is restricted or handcuffed by local politics. And I'm imagining a lot of folks in your district are fed up with this and really want change. They call it flyover country, but I don't believe that. I believe that outside a small few progressive elite, that the majority of this nation, America First is in their DNA, and they want to go back to that.
Oh yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, because the working class and the middle class have been so affected by global economics. They've been affected by border insecurity, and we feel it. These aren't abstract concepts to us. I mean, the squeeze that we feel from massive amounts of unchecked illegal immigration in terms of crime, but also in terms of undercutting U.S. labor. That's massive. And then just up here in the Northwest, especially with the way that these cities have just continued to rot, overflowed with homeless people, with crime. and then violence from Antifa and BLM in our own districts. Like we feel that on every level, the economic level, we feel it in law and order. So people are really ready for a change, and they're really sick of being misrepresented or ignored or talked down to by DC elites.
I believe that there's no question. What committees are you interested in? Where do you see yourself as far as when you're in Congress? What would you like to get your feet wet doing?
I would love to be on the Armed Services Committee. I think I'm a pretty natural fit for that because of my background. Also, intelligence oversight, I think, is a really good one. That's something we need. Bringing the national security state to heel, I think, is absolutely critical. The way that the FBI, the CIA, and all these upper level intelligence agencies have really gotten into politics. We saw with the Russiagate issues. We've seen with January 6th. I think that's key. I would also like to be on the Natural Resources Committee because I think deregulating our natural resources sector, whether it's timber, whether it's oil and natural gas, is absolutely critical to getting us off of being hooked to foreign labor markets, and relying on others for what we've been blessed with by divine providence, what we could actually harvest from our own land here. I think that's a huge national security issue. I also think it's a massive moral issue. I feel that the government, we have a moral obligation to be able to put our people first and give them access to not just the resources, but the jobs that come with those resources to make us self-sufficient.
Well, in full disclosure, Joe and I haven't talked before. We didn't have any pre-conversation, but I'm tracking with you. It's a moral issue. Our Constitution was made wholly for virtuous and moral people, not perfect people, but people that make moral decisions. I'm a big fan of rehabilitating the intelligence services, where I spent most of my career. And right now we have an agency that I believe is completely broken. It's become a political tool, and we have a Department of Justice and, unfortunately, a Federal Bureau of Investigation that, with my sight into it, and I know we probably have a lot of the similar optics, is unmoored from justice. And we're seeing a two-tier justice system. The interesting thing about the Federal Bureau of Investigation, it was an executive order that created it, and it could be an executive order that ends it. I'm a big fan of the marshals. And I think we have to address our intelligence services. We have to address the armed services that we have. The leadership we have now. You understand this. You have General Milley, who was passed over for promotion twice. He's not promotable. Yet all of a sudden he has this meteoric rise. It was the same way with McMaster's in Austin as well. And the people that suffer, unfortunately, are people like your late wife, like yourself, like a lot of our brothers, where it seems like they want to perpetuate this continual funding stream for these ABC contracts. So you're going to have your work set out for you when you get there.
Yeah, it's going to be I think it's going to be a grind. I wish there was one quick solution we could do, but I think it's going to take a lot of hard work and a lot of accountability. But again, that's what I think the American people want to see, because we've just seen institutional failure on pretty much every single level. We could probably spend hours talking about all the ways our institutions have failed us, but I think it's very glaring the way that our intelligence and justice system has failed us. And then the armed services committees, I think that they need to really tighten down on the military. The way that Milley and Austin handled the withdrawal from Afghanistan, the flippant nature in the way that they addressed the way that we lost 13 of our best on the way out, the way that they lied about pretty much everything. And then they're sitting there in front of Congress essentially saying, well, it's not our fault, let's just move on. I really think that the American people want to see accountability if we're going to continue to give these institutions so much power. And I think it's critical we go and fight for that.
Yeah, I can tell you from firsthand experience in Afghanistan that they knew the situation on the ground. They just chose to ignore it. They chose to ignore it. And I would like to see someone get to the bottom of how you leave $85 billion in lethal aid. Who signed off on that? We have Prepo in Oman. We could have moved all that stuff to Oman. We could have moved it to the UAE. And I pray that when you're in there that, you get to the bottom of this. And I'll tell you, if you need anything, I'm free. I'll come. I'll help any way I can to support your mission, and I think there's a lot of us out there that are really praying hard. We believe in providence. We believe in God. And I believe he's raised you up for this time. And I'm excited for you. I think you've got big future in front of you. Just be careful for, as my wife calls them, the Arañas in Washington, D.C., the spiders, the girls.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we have a lot of work to do. I mean, there's just no other way to look at it. It's going to be a long, hard slog. But I do feel optimistic, like you said. I mean, divine providence, however you want to look at it. I think the American people are waking up to all this, and I feel really positive. There's a lot to feel negative about nowadays, but I feel incredibly inspired by the bravery we're seeing from the school boards to people calling out what's going on the southern border. I think the American people are standing up, and I think we're really going to turn our country around.
Yeah, I think the sleeping giant is awake. And what I don't think the progressives and the elite understand is that guys like you and guys like other folks, myself, we live for the mission. And when the mission, if we're willing to go 6,000 miles around the world to complete a mission, what do they not understand that we're willing to do here peacefully, but with great determination? And you have two great reasons that you look at every day. Well, listen, how can people go and support you?
Yeah, absolutely. JoeKentForCongress.com is where to go to find out more information, links to all my social media. And if people can, I'd really appreciate any kind of small donation, as big as they can go. But really, we've been winning 2-1 against an 11-year incumbent on individual contributions. And that's because people have been giving $5, $10, $15. And that right there is power. That frees us up from all these corporate PACs. The corporate PACs want to be able to buy you. But with Americans from all over the country chipping in $5, $10, $15, you can free up your politicians. You can free up your elected officials from needing those corporate PACs. So if people can, JoeKentForCongress.com is the place to make that donation.
Everyone listening, I want all my folks out there, let's everyone do $100 because really $100 is like $10 now. So it's not that big a deal. I mean, so everyone should go to Joe Kent for Congress and give $100. And I know my numbers. If we can do that, we should have a significant amount of money coming in for you today. And listen, whatever you're doing, stop doing it now. Go to Joe Kent for Congress and give $100 towards your future. I've never said this about anyone. I interview a lot of people, but this guy's going to go and fight. He lost his wife. He has his kids. He's willing to leave a beautiful place that he doesn't have to do this, folks. So he's not going to tell you, I'll tell you. He has nothing to prove. He has everything to lose, but in his heart, he doesn't have a choice. So go to Joe Kent for Congress. Give $100. If you have more money than that, give more than that. And let's get you over the finish line, brother. And if there's anything we can do, please let us know. I really appreciate you taking the time today. I don't want to take too much of your time.
No, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me on.
Joe Kent for Congress. That's the only way we're going to keep freedom rolling.
Head high, protest line. Freedom scribbled on your sign. Headline, New York Times. Standing on the edge of a revolution. Hey, hey, just obey. Your secret's safe with the NSA. In God we trust, or the CIA. Standing on the edge of a revolution.
Scalpel with Dr. Keith Rose.
Give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts and subscribe to The Scalpel wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow us on Instagram at The Scalpel Podcast, on Twitter at The Scalpel Edge. Email kfr@scalpeledge.com or the website scalpeledge.com.